Well, I've never done it. And the one time I tried to be present in a room where a friend was giving birth, I needed to get out really fast before I fainted. I knew that wasn't going to be real helpful to her process. She needed to focus. She needed to be all about herself and her body and her baby coming out into the world. So I needed to be like, bye, I'll see you later when it's all born and you guys are on the other side of this. During a Hebrew Bible class many years ago, my professor explained to us that the expression gird your loins appears in the Bible when men are getting ready to go into battle and when women are getting ready to go into childbirth. We have, I think, largely forgotten that for a very long time, childbirth was so dangerous that that was an apt analogy. Going off to war, going into battle. Of course, when women do this, they're not going to vanquish an enemy, but to push forth a human being from their own bodies. As I said, I have never done it. I never had that calling. And I'm astonished by the fierce power and strength of all women who have given birth. Women are mighty. Birthing is brutal. I'm not surprised that we throw a lot of flowers and lace all over it for Mother's Day. It's a profoundly powerful thing, what mothers do, to bring forth new life. And there is, I think, a primordial kind of fear that arises in us, especially those of us who have not done it, when we think about that mightiness. I don't know if you got the mother you needed. Mine was already a depressed alcoholic, very unhappy in her marriage by the time I came along, the second of her babies. She fought very hard to bring her own life into being later, after we were all grown enough to be out of the house, after her husband had died. So my mom gave birth to herself after giving all her survival strength to her children for 20 years. Hi, Mom, I know you're watching this, and I love you. In her birthing herself, she was a great example to me. Bringing forth new life, another's or your own, is a Herculean effort. Respect to all who make that effort. So I thought I would use birthing as a metaphor for the most significant work that we do together as a church, which is, as we say, we engage in life-giving ministries. That's kind of a catchphrase, life-giving. And it sounds really lovely. You get this visual image of people holding hands and singing hymns and dishing up food for the hungry and spreading around love in places of hatred or fear or division and showing up in love, life-giving. And there is, in fact, a tremendous beauty in the ministry that we do, that we all do. As I mentioned earlier, you called me by vote 4 years ago to be your minister, but a significant portion of my work is to try to organize and equip every single one of you for your own ministries, and to make sure that the structures and programs we have in place here provide opportunities for you to find and do the work that your soul must have. In the early Christian church, which was actually a weird little collection of people, it was an underground, illegal, endangered, and scattered group, a community organizer named Paul wrote letters to the new churches that were starting up, which were trying to figure out exactly who they were and how they were going to be together. It's funny that they struggled with exactly the same things then as we do now, and that has actually come to my mind more powerfully in the last couple of weeks as we've been working on what we call safe congregation policy and guidelines. Karen and I are working on that, and Debbie Boggs as well. And it's some of the things that we are birthing into policy now are exactly the things that the Apostle Paul were writing about, 2,000 years ago. Paul talked a lot about, quote, a new life in Christ to his churches that he was writing to. What he meant by that, how we can look at that as any commitment, any commitment that any of us makes to be in community, whether Christian or not, is going to create new life. But what's really important to remember is how much effort and discomfort this can require, like the labor of a woman giving birth. We don't have a born-again theology in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. We believe that we were born just fine the first time around. But certainly we know that at some level, engagement with spiritual communities is going to birth something within us and among us that's always happening. That new life is something that happens personally, individually, and it happens institutionally as the community keeps giving birth to itself and experiences death and then gives birth again. And that can feel very frightening, just like when Annie Lamott describes being frightened by the labor pains. It can be really scary. It can be really scary when one life cycle of an institution dies and you're in the labor and you don't know and you're just pushing what's going to be born. So the labor and the pain that can occur in the birthing process of new life in community takes a lot of attention. It takes, like Lamaze, the breathing and the focus, the way that you do to birth a child. In our own small universe of this church, we are aware, I think we need to be aware, that the church itself as an institution all over the country is in a time of death. Many, many things that we have traditionally expected about life of church is dying, like the assumption that everybody's looking for a church, or that church life is something that is, if you don't participate in the life of a house of worship or a religious life, you're somehow not included in a respectful way in your community. We can assume now people aren't available any longer to come to worship on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. People aren't available. Very, very, very important changes in our society structure has meant that volunteer hours and effort are not anywhere near the availability that they were in a former era. And this has a lot of causes, not the least of which women who used to do the majority of volunteer work in churches are working now. They're working outside the home. Another change is that there are sports on Sunday mornings that compete with churches for the time spent with children. And so we've got to really adjust to that, and we have to birth a new life that is wise and resilient and nimble. It's a word we're using a lot in our leadership lately, and unified. We must be aware of each other and proactive in thinking about what needs to be done to birth new life. Who do I need to meet and connect with that I haven't met yet? How can I remember that this is not just about me and my needs? Because here's what's going on. We all, in our little community, exist in a much greater reality that is very demanding at this time. And you know it is. Our time demands of us that we keep our vision outward, not only inward. When I look at my schedule, I'm preparing my annual report right now. When I look at my schedule of the past year, I notice, just the regular scope of things that I do all the time, but then I look at all these emergency meetings, tons of clergy meetings in the community, at least a dozen, between a dozen and 20. With other community leaders, political organizers, social service agencies, a lot of ECHO, our Essex Community Organization. These are crisis response meetings to the crisis of immigrants being threatened, to marches, organizing marches. How many of you have been on a march this year? A lot, okay, and they're constant. Threats to democracy, unlawful detention, women's rights under threat nationally. By the way, our own Unitarian Universalist Association is in free fall. We had the resignation of our president, the resignation of our 2 top staff members, and now just yesterday, the resignation of our moderator. Jim Key has resigned from his position for health reasons. So if I don't build into my week this reality that we are in a time of fairly urgent need and really regular kinds of crises, I'm going to be clinging to old ways that makes no room for the new life that has to be born. And I can't do that because birthing requires sacrifice. You know this. If you've ever made room for a baby, you know if every room is full, something has to move. You know, some people put the baby in a dresser drawer. You got to move the socks and the underwear out. If you're going to put in a full nursery, you got to move, somebody's losing their office space, right? You save and you spend money differently when you're preparing for new life. Suddenly it's like, oh, we can't just do everything we used to do. You come to realize that this is all about that new life. You say goodbye to sleeping in. You give over your very body, if you're a nursing mother, to the hunger of that child. And when that baby's hungry, too bad, you're getting up. Somebody's getting up to feed the baby. I want to share with you a poem that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I think you may know this poem. It's the scariest poem about birthing that I know of. It's Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, which was written right around the First World War. And here it is. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. A waste of desert sand, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it wind shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? It's okay if you don't understand all the allusions in the poem or the entire content. I just want to highlight some of those amazing images. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. I think of the immigrants, the migrants, refugees drowning, trying to get somewhere safe. And they end, what rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? It's a prophetic poem, just like the prophets of the Bible set out warnings to their people in their time. Like Isaiah wrote in a passage where he imagined God as a laboring mother. In this passage, I'm going to find it. For a long time, he speaks for God here, for a long time I have held my peace. I have kept myself still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. What is slouching toward Bethlehem to be born? We know what that creature is. We're starting to get a sense of its contours. That creature is hatred. That creature is environmental degradation, committed with glee and dollars spilling out of pockets. That creature is lies and corruption. It is racism. It is a government that creates policy to enshrine those evils into laws that can choke out the life, the birthing of possibility, joy, security, health, and the inclusion of everyone who is here in what we have long referred to as the American dream, choking it from its victims if this creature can get its claws on them, and we cannot let that happen. I am telling you in the name of the ancestors whose lives and mistakes and sorrows and sacrifices birthed and sent us forth, what we birth from among us must be stronger than that rough beast. It must be wiser and resilient, responsive, generous, courageous, and powered by love. We are all called to bring this life into being. So gird your loins. Make room in the house. Make room in your hearts. And let's make those sleepless nights and sacrifices work on behalf of a new creation. Amen.